When Trnt was in his room, his emotion was so great that he did not know what to do, and as he walked back and forth tears flowed from his eyes, and so he did nothing for 3 hours but pace, lie down, and get up again. Then he left the room full of anger. As secretly as he could he went in disguise to the garden gate, and in the orchard he found the black gardener who had arrived only shortly before. He saw him in the doorway of his room, putting on a pair of red pants. When Trnt saw him, he looked around, and no one else was in sight. Then he seized him by the hair, pushed him into the room, and cut off his head. He returned to his room without anyone seeing him, because everyone was in the square where the celebrations was taking place. Trnt then said, "O just and true God, you who correct our faults, I ask you vengeance and not justice for this lady. Tell me, pitiless maiden, was my disposition less agreeable to your desires than this black gardener? If you had loved as I thought you did, you would still be mine, but you never did love me. Let us leave Trnt in his lament now, and return to the emperor who, with all the ladies, was getting ready for the celebration. At this moment a message arrived, telling him about an unfortunate event that had happened in the camp 3 days previously. The Duke of Macedonia and the Duke of Pera were captains of the camp, and they often went out to do battle against the Turks. But the Turks were afraid of all the water that the Christians released. They often fought, and many men from both sides died. But for every 10 Christians who died, 300 Turks died. The reason for this was that when the Turks came into the city of St. George, the Christians released all the river waters, and from the canal ground was like clay, so that the horses could not get out of it, and the men on foot could not escape. But one day the Turks decided to come 4,000 strong, armed with spades and baskets, picks and vinegar and fire, to cut through the mountain so that the water would spread down the dry riverbed and would leave them free. Further on, a league from where the Turks were, was a large section of a toppled wall where there was no one. All the Moorish soldiers went there at night. The foot soldiers stayed in that deserted place, while those on horseback went into a forest half a league away so that they would not be seen. In the morning the spies came and told the captains that the Turks had arrived. They held council, and they all agreed to mount and ride against the Turks. First they sent out scouts, who came back with the news that the enemy was going to try to cut through the mountain to control the water. The Christians went there. As soon as they arrived, the foot soldier began skirmishes that lasted a long time, so that many men from both sides died. Finally, when it was nearly noon, the Turks found themselves too tightly pressed, and they abandoned their tools and took flight. The Christians quickly went to the pass half a league away, and there was so much water there that they could not cross it except with a great effort and danger. Then, when they did make their way across, the others were at a great advantage. At a gallop the Moors left all the foot soldiers behind, with about 5,000 men following them until they took refuge in the unpopulated village. But it was too heavily populated for the Christians. When the Turks regrouped at the broken wall, the Duke of Macedonia said, "Gentlemen, I don't think we should go any further. We don't know what kind of an ambush may be in store for us. The enemy is always thinking of how they can do us the most harm." The Duke of Pera, who was the other captain, was very envious, and he said maliciously, "Duke of Macedonia, you have very little experience in arms, and here you are telling us about the danger we could run into. Turn back and flee. You would be better off with the women in the city than here." The Duke of Macedonia did not want to create discord among the men and have them start fighting among themselves, so he tried to hold his tongue, but he could not restrain himself, and he answered, "Duke of Pera, you would be better off if you kept quiet. Who has been honored in battle? I, the Duke of Macedonia, am known as a conqueror, while the Duke of Pera is held low in esteem because of the battles he has engaged in." The other knights and grandees interrupted the argument and made them stop. Some wanted to advance and others to retreat, but in the end they had to go on because the Duke of Pera said, "Whoever wants to come with me or go back is free to do so." And he started out, so all the others felt they had to follow him. When they reached the deserted village, the Turks on top of the wall defended it bravely. There was a ditch there, and they had to dismount and fight with lances because they had no other arms. While they were doing this, the forces of the Sultan and the Turk came out, some through one gate and some through the other, and they caught them in the middle. There was a great slaughter, and they captured many of them. I can say about this sad adventure that everyone who dismounted was killed or taken prisoner, and only one knight was able to escape. With this victory the Turks returned to the city of Blnc and put their captives in strong prisons. This news reached the emperor while he was in the hall waiting for the ladies to come so that they could go to the square for the celebrations. The emperor, in the presence of all who was there, cried, "Oh, disconsolate widows, lament, tear out your hair, scratch your faces, dress in mourning, for the flower of chivalry has died, and it will never be recovered." The crying, the wailing, was so great that in the palace that it soon spread throughout the city. The festivities turned into mourning and lamentations. Then the emperor sent for Trnt to give him the sad news and show him the letters he had received. When the chamberlain came to Trnt's door, he heard him crying out, "Oh, poor me! Oh, cruel fortune! Why have you done these things to me? To think that the excellent lady would give herself to a black Moor, the enemy of our faith! Would that I had never seen such a thing! The woman I love most in the world and hope to serve! Oh, you wicked widow! I wish I had never known you, for you will be the cause of my death and destruction." The emperor's chamberlain heard him talking and crying, but he could not make out the words because the door was closed. But to do the emperor's bidding, he called out, "Oh, captain, the emperor is calling you and wishes to see you." When the chamberlain returned to the emperor, he said, "Sire, your captain already knows about the terrible things that have happened. I heard him grieving piteously." The captain came to the chamber and saw the princess lying on the ground with the doctors gathered around her. When he saw her like this, he could not help but exclaim, "Why are you allowing this lady to die without helping her? Even though her guilt cannot be excused, I still pray God that she will live longer than I." The doctors didn't understand him and thought he was bewailing the bad news, and Trnt thought everyone was crying because of the princess. Then he turned and saw the empress, who had torn all the veils from her head. At another side he saw the emperor sitting on the floor, still as a statue. He had the letters in his hand and motioned Trnt over and gave them to him. When Trnt read them, he said, "It's worse than I thought." Then he began to console the emperor. At this moment the princess regained consciousness. She opened her eyes and begged Trnt to come to her. The princess made him sit next to her and said, "Oh, my last hope, if you truly love me, don't let your life and mine be taken from this world until the day that all the dukes, counts, and marquises are recovered who have been killed or placed in cruel prisons." While she was speaking, two men who had fled the camp came in, and she could say no more, nor could Trnt answer. They told them in detail about the destruction and about the terrible argument between the Duke of Macedonia and the Duke of Pera, and how 5,000 knights had been killed or taken prisoner. The emperor, his eyes brimming with tears and barely able to speak, began to lament. "Oh, unlucky captains, you, more willful than wise, have ignored my counsel. Find comfort in a cruel prison, thinking that you will never again see your emperor, for your actions have not been well thought out." The emperor got up from his seat and went into a chamber, tears springing from his eyes, his head in his hands. When the princess saw how he was grieving, she lost consciousness. The wisest doctor of them all said, "I have little hope for this lady's life. She has fainted 3 times, and now I cannot feel her pulse." When Trnt heard the doctor say these words, he quickly said, "Oh, cruel death, wouldn't it be better and more for you to come to me first, instead of letting me see her die? Even though she has deeply hurt me, I want to keep her company." And with extreme grief, he fell to the ground, and all the weight of his body fell on the leg which had been broken, and it broke again, and even worse than before. Blood came out of his nose and his ears, and especially from his leg, and it was a wonder that he did not lose his life. Then they quickly went to tell the emperor, and he said, "It is not at all surprising. For all of his relatives there is not one left who is not dead or being held prisoner. But this is my consolation, because to get his relatives and friends out of prison he will perform admirable feats." The emperor began to go to Trnt when he saw his daughter lying half dead, and he said, "God help me, I don't know which of them to help first." But he had his daughter lifted up and placed in her bed, and then Trnt was put in a beautiful room. They quickly removed his clothing and treated his leg, straightening it a little, and he was completely unaware of everything they did for him, because he was unconscious for 36 hours. When he regained consciousness, he asked who had brought him there, and Hippotulus told him, "What, my lord? Don't you know what a great freight you brought us? You've been unconscious for 2 days and haven't had anything to eat. Your body can't hold up that way, so please take what the doctors order you to have." "I don't want anything that will bring my health back," said Trant. "I want only death."